I tied the satin ribbon on the gift bag, my smile fixed as the laughter circled around me. She barely belongs here, my daughter-in-law whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. The room smelled of lilac soap and store-bought cake, but all I could taste was shame. After raising him alone, after paying every bill with blistered hands, after 40 years of being his mother, I was disposable. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The pastel streamers sagged just slightly in the corners of the fellowship hall, weighed down by humidity and time. Helen Turner stood near the long table stacked with punch cups and crustless cucumber sandwiches. A polite smile stretched across her lips as she tied a satin ribbon around a gift bag. Her fingers worked the knot carefully, tug, twist, tuck, while her ears, like always, caught everything. Honestly, she barely belongs here, Sabrina said with a breezy laugh that cut like a blade through the gentle buzz of conversation. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was full. The kind that women share when they know who holds the power in a room. Helen didn't look up. She didn't need to. She knew that voice by now. Smooth on the surface, sharp underneath. She'd once tried to convince herself it was just nerves, that Sabrina only acted brittle around family. But nerves didn't whisper cruelty with such practiced ease. Across the room, Evan stood with a hand on a tray of cupcakes. He didn't laugh, but he didn't look at his mother either. He shifted his weight, adjusted his collar, and stared at the carpet like it might offer him a way out. Helen pulled the ribbon tight and snipped the ends diagonally with the small scissors she always carried in her purse. It was habit, making things tidy. Giving her hands something to do while her chest turned heavy. Marlene Bishop caught her eye from the beverage table. Her expression, usually frank to the point of comic relief, was unusually tight. She raised her coffee cup just slightly, a silent toast or maybe a question. Helen offered a small smile in return, polished, grandmotherly. The kind of smile that looks like composure but feels like grit between your teeth. Sabrina, radiant in a fitted floral dress that no doubt cost more than Helen's entire week of groceries, flitted among her guests. Evan and I are so lucky, she cooed to one of her sorority-looking friends, to have everyone here, even his mother. The way she said it, even. Like Helen was a relic they'd dusted off for the occasion. A small group of women turned to glance at Helen just briefly. Then away again, their chuckles muffled but unmistakable. Helen inhaled deeply and reached for the next gift. She adjusted the tissue paper, smoothed it, folded the edges inward like she was tucking something precious into a drawer she'd never open again. The room smelled like lilac hand soap and store-bought frosting. Too sweet. Artificial. Helen wondered if anyone else noticed how quiet Evan had become. "Mom, you okay?" Carla Morris's warm voice came from just behind her. She smelled like cinnamon and butter. She must have come straight from the bakery. Helen turned slowly, keeping the ribboned bag close to her chest. "Of course," she said, voice light. "It's a lovely shower." Carla raised one eyebrow. "Uh-huh. And I'm Miss Tennessee." Helen laughed, but her eyes didn't join in. Carla stepped forward and wrapped her in a hug, the kind that squeezed just long enough to crack a little of the armor. Helen let herself lean into it, just for a moment. Then pulled back, composed again. "It's almost over," Carla said in a low voice. "You did your part. No one can say you didn't show up." Helen nodded. "Showing up," she said softly, "isn't always the hard part." Across the room, Sabrina unwrapped a onesie that said, "Born to Rule." More laughter. She held it up like a trophy, then pointedly called out, "Oh, and this one's from your mom, Evan. Look how traditional it is." People laughed again. Evan gave a small, embarrassed smile. Still, He didn't meet his mother's eyes. Helen placed the last gift down on the table with care, fingers lingering on the edge. "I need some air," she murmured to Carla, who nodded without asking questions. Helen stepped out into the parking lot, the warm Tennessee air clinging to her skin. The crickets had already started their early evening song, and she stood for a moment, listening. Not to them, really, but to something deeper. Something inside. The door creaked open behind her. For a split second she thought it might be Evan. It wasn't. It was Marlene. She lit a cigarette she wasn't supposed to have, took one drag, then held it out to Helen. Helen didn't take it. But she didn't walk away either. "Well," Marlene said, blowing smoke toward the darkening sky. "What are you going to do about that little queen bee?" Helen didn't answer. Not yet. But her jaw set. Her hands, still clasped together, tightened just slightly. Inside, someone had started a game involving diapers and chocolate bars. More laughter. Marlene flicked her ash to the pavement. "Because if you're thinking what I think you're thinking..." Helen turned, eyes sharp. "I'm not thinking," she said, voice low. "I'm remembering." Helen waited until the house went still. The only sound came from the kitchen clock. Each tick a soft knock against her ribs. She hung her cardigan over the back of a chair, kicked off her low heels and crossed to the oak cabinet in the dining room. The cabinet's glass panes caught the lamplight like thin ice, reflecting her own face back at her. The fixed smile had cracked, leaving something harder underneath. Her fingers brushed past china teacups and folded table linens to the bottom drawer. She knew exactly what she was reaching for. The binder felt heavier than it had when she'd first tucked it there. Thicker somehow, though nothing had been added. She carried it to the table and sat down. The scent of lilac from the baby shower clung faintly to her dress. She ignored it. With a soft sigh, she opened the binder. Cream-colored pages, legal font, neat tabs labeled in Thomas Yates's steady handwriting. Wills, trusts, codicils. She flipped until she found the section she wanted and smoothed her palm over the page, like a priest over a Bible. There it was. Sabrina Turner, secondary beneficiary. Her name printed in crisp black ink. Helen traced it once with her fingertip, then pulled her hand back as though the page were hot. She remembered the day she'd added it. Evan had been newly engaged, bright-eyed, desperate to show his fiancé that his family welcomed her. Helen had told Thomas she wanted things to be fair, that she didn't want anyone feeling excluded. Back then, she'd said the word like it meant balance, kindness. Now it sat in her mind like a joke. Fair had been the bait she'd hung on a hook. Foolish was the fish she'd become. Helen closed her eyes and saw the moment as clear as day. Sabrina perched on her sofa, feigning modesty as she accepted a slice of pound cake. Evan grinning beside her, whispering, "Thanks, Mom, this means a lot." She'd thought she was making a peace offering. In truth, she'd been giving away her power. The page rustled as she turned it back, reading the clauses, the signatures, the witnesses. Her own handwriting in the margin, small notes she'd made over the years. How had she not seen this coming? She pressed her thumb into the paper's edge until it left a dent. Her phone lay on the placemat, dark screen reflecting her frown. She picked it up, hesitated. Thomas Yates was probably home by now, watching some grainy western on his old television. But his number had never left her contacts. She tapped it. He answered on the third ring, voice steady as ever. "Helen. Evening." "Thomas," she said, and was startled by how firm her voice sounded. "We need to talk about my will." A brief pause. She could hear his clock chiming in the background. "All right," he said. "Tell me." Helen turned her chair slightly, looking out the window. The street outside was quiet, porch lights glowing in neat rows. She lowered her voice. though no one was there to overhear. "I've changed my mind about a few things." "Then we'll change them," Thomas replied. "Simple as that. You're under no obligation to keep anything the way it is." Helen pressed her lips together. "Even if it upsets people?" "Especially then," Thomas said. "Your estate, your wishes, nothing's final until you say it is." She exhaled, a slow, shaky breath. Something inside her loosened. The tightness around her heart gave just enough space for air to move again. "I'll come by the office this week," she said. "Come by tomorrow if you like," he said. "We'll make it right." Helen's gaze dropped back to the binder. Sabrina's name stared back at her, neat and smug. She closed the cover with a quiet snap. "Tomorrow," she said, and hung up before her voice could falter. She rose, tucking the binder under her arm, and crossed to the fireplace. The embers from her morning fire had gone cold, gray, and silent. She rested the binder on the mantel instead, a place she could see it, a promise to herself. Through the window, a car slowed on the street. A familiar silhouette in the driver's seat. Evan's truck. He didn't park, just idled, headlights casting long white stripes across her lawn. Helen stood very still, binder clutched to her chest. The truck lingered, then crept forward, disappearing down the street. Helen's jaw tightened. Tomorrow wouldn't just be paperwork. It would be the first move in a game she hadn't planned to play, but now fully intended to win. The bell over the cafe door gave a gentle jingle as Helen stepped inside, wrapped in her favorite wool coat despite the September warmth. The place was mostly empty, too early for the lunch crowd, too late for breakfast. Carla waved her over from a window booth, already halfway through a cinnamon roll. Marlene was there too, nursing a mug of black coffee like it had personally offended her. Helen slid into the seat across from them, setting her leather handbag on the bench beside her. Carla reached for her hand immediately, giving it a squeeze without a word. Marlene leaned back. "You look like hell, Helen," in a classy, church lady kind of way. Helen cracked the barest smile. "Thanks, I think." "Talk," Carla said gently. "Don't make us guess." Helen hesitated just long enough to scan the room, just a barista wiping counters, and a quiet couple near the back. She lowered her voice. "At the shower," she said. Sabrina made a comment, loud enough to be heard. Marlene rolled her eyes. "Of course she did." "She said," Helen continued, "I barely belong there." Carla's mouth fell open. Marlene froze mid-sip. "She what?" Carla said. Helen nodded. "Laughed about it with her friends. Evan heard, didn't say a word." There was a long pause. Then, clink. Marlene slammed her teacup down so hard it wobbled in its saucer. "Erase her," she said flatly. "From everything. That mouthy little peacock doesn't deserve a dime." "Marlene," Carla said softly but not in protest. "No, I mean it," Marlene snapped, eyes fierce. "We spend our whole lives trying to be gracious, host the dinners, send the cards, bite our tongues. And for what? So some spoiled brat can strut into our lives and act like we're expired coupons?" Helen stared into her untouched coffee. Steam curled upward, vanishing into the morning light. "I'm already on it," she said quietly. Carla blinked. "You are?" Helen nodded once. "Binder's ready. I'm seeing Thomas this afternoon. Just wanted to talk it through with someone first. Make sure I'm not being—" She paused, searching. "Petty." "You're being precise," Marlene said. "Which is better?" Carla reached across and tucked a loose strand of hair behind Helen's ear. "You're being a mother who's finally done swallowing nonsense." Helen's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced down. "Evan, hope you liked the shower? Mom." Her thumb hovered over the screen. She put the phone back down without replying. Carla watched her. "You okay?" "I will be," Helen said. Marlene drained her coffee, then stood. Let's get out of here. I've got quilting squares to cut and a dentist appointment I'd rather cancel. Carla followed suit, brushing crumbs off her lap. You want us to go with you to Thomas's office later? Helen shook her head. No. This part I need to do alone. They walked her out to the parking lot. Carla gave another squeeze to her hand. Marlene lit her cigarette the moment they hit the pavement. You ever need help packing boxes? Marlene muttered. You know where I keep my crowbar. Helen chuckled. I'll keep that in mind. As the others drove away, Helen opened her car and pulled out the manila folders she'd prepared the night before. One for the will, one for the trust, one labeled Sabrina Turner, though it would be shredded soon enough. Back home, she laid everything out on the dining room table with methodical care. No music, no television. Just the sound of paper rustling and her own breath steadying as she created order. Clean piles, labeled dividers, decisions made. Her phone lit up again. Evan this time, calling. She stared at it until it stopped ringing. A voicemail icon popped up. She didn't open it. She went back to her folders. Outside, wind rustled through the hedges. The air had that sharp, clean smell of the season shifting. Helen clipped the folders shut one by one. Done. Ready. The doorbell rang. She froze. No one ever just dropped by on a Tuesday. Her spine straightened. She walked slowly to the door and opened it. Sabrina stood on the porch, sunglasses perched on her head, holding a tiny gift bag with gold tissue paper. Hi, Helen, she said, with that camera-ready smile. Mind if I come in? The next morning, sunlight slanted through the tall windows of Thomas Yates's office, catching in the dust motes that hung in the air like faint constellations. Helen paused just inside the doorway, inhaling the scent of oak polish and old paper. She'd been here dozens of times over the years for mundane things, property taxes, insurance questions. But today, the room felt heavier, like stepping into a courtroom. Morning, Helen, Thomas said, rising from behind his desk. His voice was the same slow drawl it had been since high school debate club. Steady, deliberate. He shook her hand, warm and dry, then gestured to the leather chair opposite his own. Let's get you settled. Helen placed her handbag on the floor and sat. She'd dressed carefully. Navy skirt, crisp blouse. Her wedding ring still on her finger, though Frank had been gone 8 years. In her lap, she clasped her hands to stop them from fidgeting. Thomas slid a thick folder toward her. We'll go through it clause by clause, he said, tapping the top sheet with a fountain pen. Nothing gets changed unless you say so. Helen nodded, throat tight. Let's start. He flipped open the first section. This is your primary bequest. The house, savings, investments. Evan remains the principal heir. His pen moved down the page. This paragraph here. He turned the folder toward her. Lists the secondary beneficiary. Helen's eyes went to the line she'd memorized last night. Sabrina Turner. Black ink on cream paper, smug as a calling card. Thomas raised an eyebrow. We're removing her, correct? Yes, Helen said, her voice steady. All of it. All right. He drew a line neatly through Sabrina's name and wrote, removed per client instruction in the margin. His handwriting was as tidy as a ledger. This amendment supersedes all prior instructions, he explained. She'll have no standing to contest. Helen watched him work, feeling an odd flutter in her stomach. It wasn't joy, exactly, more like relief edging into a kind of quiet resolve. She glanced out the window. Downtown Nashville spread out below, narrow streets, brick facades, a church spire stabbing up into the bright sky. Somewhere down there, Sabrina was probably sipping an overpriced latte, assuming the world owed her everything. Thomas kept talking. We'll keep Evan as the primary. Any charitable contributions you want to add can go into a separate codicil. He pushed the papers to her side of the desk. Initial here, and sign at the bottom. Helen took the pen. The weight of it felt strange, heavier than a simple pen should be. She lowered the nib to the page and scrawled her initials in the tiny boxes, then signed her name full across the line. Helen Marie Turner. Firm strokes, no hesitation. As she finished the last page, she felt something ease across her shoulders, like unhooking a tight bra strap after a long day. She sat back, pen still in hand. Thomas gathered the signed pages into a neat stack. "I'll file these with the register first thing this afternoon," he said. "Everything's sealed. No one sees a thing until the time comes." Helen's fingers lingered on the edge of the desk. "Thank you," she said softly. "That's what I'm here for." He slipped the folder into a manila envelope and labeled it with her name. Each motion was precise, ritualistic, like a priest preparing a chalice. For a long moment, Helen watched the envelope disappear into his file cabinet. The finality of the lock's click echoed in the quiet office. She exhaled. Long, slow, steady. Lighter than before. Almost weightless. Thomas smiled. "You're doing the right thing, Helen. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She rose from the chair, smoothing her skirt. "I'm not doubting it." At the door, she hesitated. "Thomas, how soon would someone find out?" "Only when you want them to," he said. "Until then, it's between us." Helen nodded, then left, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The hallway outside smelled of lemon cleaner and printer toner. She walked out into the sunlight, blinking as if she'd been underground. She opened her phone. A new message from Evan. "Sabrina says she's dropping by again later. Everything okay?" Helen stared at it, thumb hovering. She slipped the phone back into her purse without replying and stepped off the curb toward her car. Across the street, parked at an angle, a sleek black SUV idled. Windows tinted. She couldn't see who was inside, but the engine stayed running. Helen unlocked her car slowly, feeling the weight of the pen still in her hand like a talisman. She'd made her move. Now she wondered, who else knew? The knock at the door was too crisp to be casual. Helen set down her embroidery hoop and smoothed her skirt before opening it. Sabrina stood there, flawless as always, white blouse tucked into tailored jeans, manicured hand perched lightly on her bump like it was a diamond necklace. Evan stood behind her, half a step too far back, eyes down, jaw tense. "Helen!" Sabrina beamed like a TV anchor. "We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by." Helen didn't move. "That so?" Sabrina breezed past the threshold without waiting for an invitation. "Hope it's not a bad time," she said, already halfway into the living room. The same room she'd once said smelled like someone's grandmother. Evan followed with the quiet reluctance of a dog trained not to pull. Helen gave him a glance as she shut the door. "Afternoon, Evan." He nodded. "Hey, Mom." Sabrina spun in a slow circle, her heels clicking on the hardwood. "You know," she said, "I've always loved the crown molding in here. So charming. Real vintage Southern." Helen raised an eyebrow. "It's original, from the 40s. Sabrina smiled. "Well, Evan and I were just talking about how perfect this place will be, down the line. For the baby, I mean." Helen walked past her into the kitchen. "Is that so?" "Oh, yes," Sabrina called after her. "All that space. And the school district?" "Prime." Helen retrieved the pitcher of sweet tea from the fridge. The cold handle bit into her palm. She grabbed 3 glasses, none of them matching, and filled them with care. The ice clinked gently. Evan trailed into the kitchen, hands in his pockets. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the cabinets. Helen slid a glass toward him. "You okay, Evan?" He gave a weak smile. "Yeah. Just tired." Sabrina took her glass and sipped like she was tasting wine. We've been making lists, baby names, nursery ideas, future investments. She turned toward Evan, smiling wide. Didn't we say this house would sell in a heartbeat? Evan didn't answer, just studied the ice swirling in his glass. Helen leaned against the counter. You're planning on selling my house? Oh, not yet, Sabrina said with a laugh, waving her hand. Just thinking ahead. You know, for when the time comes. We want to be smart about the baby's inheritance. She placed her hand on her stomach, gave a soft pat like she was sealing a deal. Helen tilted her head. Inheritance. Sabrina's smile curled. Well, yes. I mean, Evan's your only child. This house, your assets, it'll all come to him eventually. And by extension, she glanced down at her stomach, then up again. Our child. The sweetness in her voice was pure poison. Evan flinched, just barely, but Helen caught it. Helen took a slow sip of her tea, savoring the chill. She said, then smiled gently. This batch turned out just right. Want lemon in yours? Sabrina blinked, thrown by the non sequitur. No, I'm good. They moved back into the living room. Sabrina perched on the edge of the couch like she was afraid it might stain. Helen sat in her usual armchair, fingers grazing the embroidery hoop she'd abandoned earlier. You know, Sabrina said, setting her glass on the coffee table without a coaster. It's funny to think that one day we'll be hosting Christmases here. I already have a vision. Fresh paint, open floor plan. Helen felt something tight coil in her chest, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she smiled. A long, serene, knowing smile. Sounds like you've really thought this through, she said, folding her hands calmly in her lap. We just want to honor your legacy, Sabrina said, her voice honeyed with faux sincerity, and give our child the future they deserve. Evan glanced at his mother, finally, the briefest flicker of guilt in his eyes. Helen returned his look with quiet patience. Well, she said, you've certainly made some ambitious plans. Sabrina beamed. We're manifesting. Helen stood, picking up Sabrina's empty glass. That's the thing about legacies, she said over her shoulder as she walked toward the kitchen. You can't always count on them turning out the way you expect. Behind her, the living room fell still. In the silence, the front door creaked as if nudged by a breeze. Helen paused in the kitchen doorway, fingers wrapped around the rim of the glass, smile still faintly playing on her lips. Sabrina didn't know. Not yet, but she would. Helen stood at the front window with a cup of coffee cradled in her hands, watching the first snow flurries fall across the quiet Nashville street. The brick house she'd lived in for 40 years stood warm and firm behind her, its foundation as solid as her resolve. Sabrina's visit had left a sour aftertaste, but Helen hadn't let it linger. Instead, she poured her energy into things that mattered: her peace, her order, her friends. The doorbell rang just after noon. She didn't have to check. Only 2 people ever knocked like that. When she opened it, Carla stood there holding a pie tin wrapped in a blue checkered cloth and a smug little grin. I brought butter pecan, she said, brushing snow from her shoulders. Because this seems like a butter pecan kind of victory. Helen chuckled and stepped aside. You always know what I need before I do. Comes with being nosy, Carla said cheerfully, handing her the pie. Now tell me, did you actually do it? Helen set the pie on the counter, her back to Carla. Signed, sealed, filed. Carla let out a whoop, loud enough to make Helen jump. You serious? You actually pulled the plug? I didn't pull it, Helen said dryly. I rewired the whole system. Carla walked over and hugged her tight from behind. You're a better woman than me. I would have mailed Sabrina a copy with glitter in the envelope. Helen smiled but didn't answer. Some things didn't need embellishment. Truth had its own weight. The phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, cutting through the moment. Helen glanced at it and her smile faded. Evan Turner, voicemail. Hey, Mom, can we talk about the family property? Just trying to make sure we're all on the same page. Carla peered over. He's catching wind. Helen pressed her finger to the screen. Deleted. No hesitation. He'll adjust. They took their pie into the den and sat with quilted blankets across their laps. The fire crackled low, glowing in the hearth. Carla tucked her legs up. So what happens next? Helen sipped her coffee. Nothing. I've done what I needed to. The rest? She let the words trail off. Outside, snow settled softly on the porch rail, on the mailbox, on the rose bushes she'd trimmed just before fall. Does Marlene know? Carla asked. She will, Helen said. By mid-afternoon, Marlene was seated cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by a riot of fabric scraps. The hum of her sewing machine mingled with the storm outside. She worked without speaking, her concentration fixed on a patch of gold and navy squares. Helen sat nearby, hand-stitching a label onto the back of an older quilt. What are you making? Something new, Marlene muttered. Something angry. Helen smiled. Quilt therapy. Better than bourbon. The rhythm of thread, the scent of starch and wood smoke, the softness of layers stacked beside them. It all formed a cocoon Helen didn't know she needed. Marlene paused her machine and looked up. You really wiped her off the will? Clean as a slate. Marlene gave a slow nod. You don't look sorry. I'm not, Helen said. Just settling into it. The snow fell thicker now, piling in soft drifts across the sidewalk. Distant car tires hissed along the slush. Inside, everything felt untouched. Carla returned that evening with hot chocolate and old movies. The three women sat shoulder to shoulder on the couch, watching His Girl Friday with blankets over their knees. When Helen laughed, it was real. But even as the house buzzed with warmth and comfort, a thought returned. Unwelcome. Insistent. The voicemail. Family property. The words haunted her, not because she feared losing the house, but because Evan had used their language, not hers, as if it all belonged to someone else already. She rose quietly and walked into the dining room, where the manila folders still sat in a drawer. She opened one, fingers tracing the first page. Turner Estate, revised. She flipped to the section on the deed. Her name, sole owner, not family, not future, just Helen Turner. The snow outside was deepening, and something told her Sabrina wasn't finished. Helen sat at the kitchen table, the early morning sun catching in the swirl of steam rising from her coffee. The snow from the day before had frozen overnight, blanketing the backyard like a porcelain sheet. It looked peaceful, untouched. But her phone buzzed again, a sharp reminder that peace was always temporary. Another message, this one from her niece, Amy in Memphis. Hey, Aunt Helen, is it true what Sabrina posted about the house and the baby inheriting everything? Just checking. Helen didn't reply. Not yet. She opened Instagram, something she usually only did to like pictures of grandkids or pies. Sabrina's latest post sat at the top of her feed, a black and white maternity shoot photo. Her hands curved under her belly like she was cradling royalty. The caption read, "Blessed to know our little one will grow up surrounded by legacy, love, and everything Helen built. Can't wait to make her home our own." Grateful Fachar next, chapter. Family property. Helen blinked, then scrolled to the comments. So lucky. Oh, you're inheriting the house? Amazing. That's what family means. Passing things down. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, not to reply to Sabrina, but to everyone watching. Another message buzzed in, her sister-in-law from Chattanooga this time. "What's this I'm seeing about your house, Helen?" Helen finally tapped out a reply, short and quiet. "We'll see." She closed the app and locked the phone, setting it down beside her mug. The screen went black, and for a moment, it felt like the silence had returned. Footsteps shuffled in from the hallway. Marlene appeared in pajama pants and one of Frank's old flannel shirts, rubbing her eyes. She was staying over for the weekend while her own place had a burst pipe dealt with, a storm casualty. "I can smell trouble from 3 rooms away," she muttered, grabbing a mug from the cupboard. "Let me guess. Sabrina posted something stupid." Helen didn't say anything, but the way she arched one eyebrow was enough. Marlene groaned. Let her dream. Let her wrap herself up in delusions like it's Prada cashmere. "I don't mind the dreaming," Helen said, standing. "It's the way she broadcasts it like a done deal." Marlene took a long sip of coffee and smirked. "Wait until reality catches up. You think she'll post that in a carousel?" Helen smiled thinly. "Doubt it." By mid-morning, Helen had turned the house warm again, not just in temperature, but in spirit. The scent of cinnamon and vanilla floated through the air as she rolled out dough on the flowered kitchen counter. "Are those the Christmas cinnamon rolls?" Marlene asked from the living room. "Little early, but I figured, why wait?" "God bless passive-aggressive baking," Marlene muttered fondly. Helen sprinkled the cinnamon sugar mixture with the same precision she'd once used for quilting seams and Sunday roast seasoning. The recipe was her mother's, never written down, always made with instinct and the right kind of mood. She was humming softly by the time the rolls went into the oven, some old Patsy Cline tune. Marlene joined in from the other room, off-key but enthusiastic. Ding! Her laptop pinged from the corner of the kitchen where she kept it charging. Helen wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened the lid. New email from Thomas Yates. Subject: Confirmation. Will update filed. She clicked. Helen. Just confirming all documents are officially recorded with the county clerk as of this morning. Sabrina Turner has been fully removed as secondary beneficiary. Any future disputes are protected by the new language. All secure. T.Y. Helen stared at the words. Her heart beat quietly in her chest. Not loud, but certain. The oven ticked. Marlene was thumbing through a newspaper, humming again. She clicked reply and typed, "Thanks, Thomas. Appreciate the clarity. Let me know if any copies go missing. Just in case." She paused before hitting send, and then her phone lit up again. This time, Evan. A text. Just one line. "Did you change something?" The knock came right after lunch. Too soon for a delivery. Too polite for Marlene. Helen opened the door with the slow calm of someone who already knew what she'd find. Sabrina stood on the porch in a caramel-toned wool coat, lips glossed and cheeks perfectly blushed. She looked like she'd walked off the cover of a holiday catalog. One hand cupped her belly. The other held a small box wrapped in ribbon. "Hi, Grandma," she sang, the title sticky with sugar. "Thought we'd pop in." Evan hovered behind her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. He gave a small nod that didn't quite reach his eyes. Helen stepped aside. "Come in, then." Sabrina made a show of stepping lightly over the welcome mat, glancing around like she was cataloging for inventory. "Still smells like cinnamon in here," she said. "So cozy." Helen closed the door and led them into the living room. The couch was still warm from Marlene's earlier nap, but the space had been reset. Fire restoked, pillows fluffed, coffee table cleared. "Tea?" Helen asked, already heading for the kitchen. "That'd be lovely," Sabrina cooed, sinking delicately into the couch like a guest of honor at a baby shower she didn't have to plan. Evan chose the armchair by the window, his hands folded awkwardly in his lap. He was wearing a windbreaker he hadn't taken off. Helen moved methodically in the kitchen. Kettle on, teacups clinked from the cabinet. Through the cutout in the wall, she could hear Sabrina talking. Not to Evan, not to herself. Loud enough for Helen. "I've been nesting," she said, looking up nursery wallpaper, rocking chairs, heirloom bassinets. You know, classic things we can pass down. "Oh, and I found a mid-century cradle that would look perfect in that front bedroom upstairs." Helen stirred honey into the tea. When she returned, she carried the tray with both hands, the china rattling just faintly as she set it down. Sabrina accepted her cup like it was royal china, then offered a bright smile. "You're going to be such a big part of this baby's life. I just know it." Helen sat across from her, folding her hands in her lap before lifting her own tea. "Is that so?" Evan finally looked up. "We just want to make sure everyone's on the same page." Sabrina leaned forward. "Right, I mean, we've been fielding a lot of questions lately. From family, friends, about the future." She looked down and rubbed her belly in slow circles. "It's important to us that the baby feels secure, like she's part of a strong legacy." Helen sipped her tea. "I imagine she will, if you're honest with her." Sabrina blinked, faltering just slightly. "Well, yes, of course. We're all about transparency." Helen placed her cup down gently. "Then I'll be transparent with you." She leaned back in her chair. The crackle of the fire filled the space between them. "I made some changes recently," Helen said. Evan sat up straighter. "To what?" "My affairs." Sabrina's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. "I don't follow." Helen tilted her head, voice cool. "My will. My property. Everything I'm leaving behind. Or not." There was a long pause. Sabrina's smile froze on her face like a mask catching in a strong wind. "Of course, we assumed we'd be included," she said slowly. "I mean, we're family, and with the baby—" "I did include who I needed to," Helen said, "and removed who I didn't." Sabrina blinked once, then twice. "But Evan's your only child. The baby is your granddaughter." Helen nodded. "That's true." Evan opened his mouth, then closed it. His hand dropped to his knee, flexing. "I'm just surprised," Sabrina said, her tone bright but frayed. "That's all. I would have thought we'd discuss something like this together." Helen stood. "I did think about it together. With myself. It's my estate." Sabrina set her teacup down a little too quickly. It clinked hard against the saucer. "This doesn't feel fair." Helen's smile was sharp and clean. "Good thing feelings don't change paperwork." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the icicles that hung from the porch eaves. Evan stood abruptly. "We should go." Sabrina didn't move right away. Her face had gone still, eyes wide and shining, not with tears, but with calculation. She rose at last and gave Helen a smile so tight it might have cracked porcelain. "Well," she said, "we'll just have to sort this out." Helen followed them to the door. "You do that." As they stepped out, the wind caught Sabrina's coat, flaring it behind her like a cape. She turned back just before the porch steps, voice cold now. "We'll talk soon." Helen closed the door without replying. Inside, the teacup sat on the tray, still warm, the sugar bowl untouched. She reached for her phone. One missed call. Blocked number. No voicemail, just a silence that felt loaded. It started with a knock, too sharp to be neighborly. Helen looked up from the fireplace where she was coaxing the last embers of yesterday's ash back into flame. She stood, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked to the door without hurry. She had a pie cooling on the windowsill and a stack of signed, notarized documents tucked in the kitchen drawer. Whatever this was, she was ready. She opened the door. Sabrina. No coat this time. Just a sleek black turtleneck, tailored slacks, and fury rolling off her in waves. Evan trailed behind, cheeks flushed from the cold or the conversation they'd clearly had in the car. Maybe both. "We need to talk," Sabrina said, voice clipped. Helen opened the door wider. "By all means." Marlene was already in the living room, curled up on the armchair with her shoes off and a half-finished quilt square in her lap. Her eyebrows lifted as the couple entered, and without a word, she reached for her thermos and took a long, slow sip. Helen gestured to the couch. Sabrina didn't sit. "You changed your will," she said flatly. Helen tilted her head. "I did." "You can't do that." Sabrina's voice cracked with disbelief. Marlene coughed softly into her hand, but the sound was unmistakably a laugh. Evan finally stepped forward. "Mom, I think what Sabrina's trying to say is, we just want to understand what happened. Why now?" "I already explained that," Helen said evenly. "You just didn't like the answer." Sabrina's hands curled into fists at her sides. "You're talking about taking everything away from your grandchild." Helen walked to the mantel, opened a small wooden box, and removed a folder. She turned and handed it to Evan. "These are the filings. Notarized. Recorded with the county. You'll see the seal if you flip the second page." Evan took it slowly, like it might burn him. His eyes skimmed the first few lines. The silence stretched. "I'm not on here either," he murmured. "No," Helen confirmed. "You're not." Sabrina's jaw dropped. "You can't just erase us. We're your family." Helen stepped forward, chin high. "You're not entitled to my life's work because you married into it and posted a nursery mood board." Sabrina's face flushed deep pink. "This house?" Helen said, gesturing around. "These walls? My savings? My name is the only one on every deed, every tax record, every utility bill. You may have spun a nice little fairy tale online, but the law doesn't bend for hashtags." Evan closed the folder and sat down slowly. "Mom." His voice was quiet, unsure. "I loved you enough to set you free," Helen said, softening slightly toward him. "But loving you doesn't mean surrendering myself to people who only want the wrapping paper, not the gift." Sabrina stepped forward, voice shaking. This is elder abuse. You've been manipulated." She pointed to Marlene. "She's influencing you." Marlene didn't even look up from her quilt. "I influence pie flavors, sweetheart. That's about it." Helen's tone turned to ice. "Don't insult my intelligence just because I finally stopped giving it away." Sabrina turned on Evan. "Say something." He looked between them, his wife, his mother, the folder still warm in his hands. "I don't know what you want me to say." "I want you to fix this," she snapped. Evan lowered his eyes. "It's not mine to fix." For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. Helen took a step closer, voice low but clear. "You once told me fairness meant including everyone, but life doesn't work that way. Fairness isn't always justice, and justice isn't always sweet." Sabrina's eyes were wide, shining, not with sadness, but rage. "This isn't over," she hissed. Marlene looked up finally, a half smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Sure looks like it from here." Sabrina spun on her heel and stormed out, the front door slamming hard enough to rattle the windows. Evan stayed behind for one long, still beat. Then, without a word, he followed her. Helen crossed to the front window, watching as Sabrina climbed into the driver's seat of their SUV and peeled away from the curb, tires spitting snow. Marlene rose slowly, her knees cracking. "Well," she said, stretching. "If I'd known it was going to be that entertaining, I'd have brought popcorn." Helen didn't laugh, because down the street, a sedan had pulled in after them, parked, engine running, watching. Helen sat at the breakfast nook, phone cradled between her shoulder and ear, her fingers absently tracing the rim of her coffee mug. Snow still blanketed the street outside, clean and undisturbed, unlike the inbox on her phone, which buzzed with fresh tension every hour. "She doesn't have a leg to stand on," Thomas said, his tone dry but certain. "Unless Tennessee law changed overnight, she can scream all she wants. It won't move a single comma in your filings." "I thought that might be the case," Helen said, calm but not relaxed. "I reviewed it twice," he continued. "Your paperwork is airtight. The will, the deed, the medical proxy, all of it. No undue influence, no mental incapacity, no coercion. She can file a claim, but it'll land like wet newspaper." Helen nodded, more to herself than to him. "Thank you, Thomas. Keep everything on file. But unless she hires a miracle worker, this ends at tantrum, not court." Helen ended the call just as a new notification flashed across her screen. A Sabrina Pearl Turner. News story posted. Helen tapped. There was Sabrina, in front of a fireplace that definitely wasn't hers. Lips pursed in mock patience, her voice syrupy and sanctimonious. "I just think, when you give your life to a family, you should be honored, not punished," she said, eyes glossy, hand protectively on her stomach. "We're grieving, and people pretending that legal documents are more important than legacy. Well, I'll leave that to God to judge." Helen swiped to the next slide. A Bible verse, cherry-picked and styled with cursive font over a blurry sunset. Marlene walked in mid-scroll, carrying 2 spools of thread and a banana muffin. "She preaching again?" Helen didn't answer. She didn't need to. Marlene peered over her shoulder, then snorted. "She better hope God's also a probate judge, because that's the only shot she's got." Helen locked the phone and stood. "I'm not worried about the law." "Oh, honey," Marlene said. "She's not aiming at the law anymore. She's aiming at public opinion." The landline rang, one of the few things in Helen's house Sabrina hadn't tried to modernize. Helen walked over, picked it up. "Hey, Mom." Evan's voice was low, hesitant. "Got a minute?" She closed her eyes for just a beat. "I do." He exhaled. "Listen, I don't want to fight, but I think we all need to get in the same room and talk. Really talk. Not with Marlene or Carla around, just us." Helen kept her tone even. "You mean just you and your wife?" "No," he said quickly. "I mean, maybe just you and me, for starters." "Please?" She considered this, but only for a second. "No, Evan," she said gently. "We don't need to talk it through. We need to let it stand." Silence on the other end. Then, "You don't sound like yourself." Helen smiled faintly. "That's because for once, I sound like myself." She hung up before he could respond. By afternoon, Carla had arrived with lemon bars and gossip. "You're all over the Facebook prayer chain," she said, plopping down on the couch. "They're saying you cut your family out, turned bitter after Frank died, and that Marlene's well, I won't repeat it, but let's just say it involves a property grab and a moonshine plot." Marlene nearly choked on her tea. "Moonshine? That's a promotion." Helen took a lemon bar, bit into it, and said calmly, "They'll move on to someone else by Tuesday." "True," Carla said. "But until then, this is better than reality TV." Helen reached for the remote, muted the actual TV, and turned her attention to the flames flickering in the hearth. She felt it again, that hum beneath her ribs. Not rage, not fear. Something stronger, steadier. Resolve. Carla raised her glass of sweet tea. To a woman who didn't blink. Marlene raised hers too. And didn't bend. Helen tapped her glass against theirs. And didn't sign. The 3 women toasted, a quiet clink between them. But as Helen leaned back into the couch, her eyes flicked toward the front window. The sedan from earlier? Still there. But this time, The door opened. A man stepped out. Suit, gloves, clipboard. Helen's smile faded. The man in the suit had left by morning. No name. No card. Just a clipboard. A few probing questions about public assets, and a strained smile that never reached his eyes. Helen had answered nothing, offered less. She'd watched him walk back to his sedan through a crust of early frost, get in, and pull away like smoke from a wet match. But the real storm came later that afternoon. Helen heard the tires before she saw the car, gravel crunching under rubber in that agitated, uneven way that always meant trouble. She set down her tea, pushed the curtain aside. Evan's SUV. Again. But this time, Sabrina was already out of the passenger seat, striding up the walk with the stiff grace of a woman who'd rehearsed her lines. Helen stepped outside before the knock landed. "Don't bother," she said calmly, closing the door behind her. Sabrina stopped cold on the front step. "We need to talk." Helen folded her arms. "We've done that." Evan stayed near the vehicle, one hand gripping the top of the driver's door, looking like he wanted to crawl inside it and disappear. Sabrina motioned around them, her voice rising. "This? All of this? You think it's just yours to decide?" Helen nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I think. Frank built this with you. Evan grew up here. You wouldn't even have this place if... This is my name on the deed. My savings that paid the property tax every year after Frank died. My hands that scraped paint off the siding when your husband was too busy to help." Her voice never raised, but it landed hard, like polished stone. A curtain twitched across the street. Another neighbor paused mid-rake. Sabrina caught the movement, then glanced around, lowering her voice, but not her venom. "You're embarrassing yourself." Helen tilted her head. "You came onto my porch to shout about what's yours. Who's embarrassing whom?" Sabrina's eyes narrowed. "You've made your little power play. Congratulations. You proved your point." Helen stepped closer, stopping just at the edge of the top stair. It wasn't a power play. It was a boundary. "This isn't how families act." "No," Helen agreed, "but it's exactly how mine will from now on." Sabrina laughed once, bitter. "You think this wins you something? Some kind of legacy? All it wins you is silence. From Evan, from your grandchild, from everyone who used to respect you. I don't need respect from people who only call when they want a piece of something." From the sidewalk, Marlene raised her phone, discreet, steady, already recording. She didn't say a word, just held Helen's gaze like a second backbone. Sabrina saw the movement. "Oh, how cute," she hissed. "You've got an audience." Helen glanced across the street where Mrs. Douglas stood half-hidden behind her garden gate. 2 doors down, the Abernathy kid had paused his basketball dribble to watch. "Guess you should have rehearsed," Helen said dryly. Evan stepped forward, finally. "Sabrina, come on, let's just go." "No," Sabrina snapped, eyes locked on Helen. "Not until she admits this is cruel, that she owes us something." Helen looked at her for a long moment, then, clearly and without emotion, said, "This is my home, my choice. You were never owed it." Sabrina's face twisted as if the words slapped her. Her hands trembled. Marlene stepped a little closer on the sidewalk, still filming, calm, resolute. Evan took Sabrina's elbow, but she yanked it free. "You'll regret this," she spat. "I already regret letting it go on as long as I did," Helen replied. Evan tried again. This time, she didn't resist. He guided her down the walkway, past the neighbor's stairs, back toward the idling SUV. Marlene finally lowered the phone. Helen didn't move until the car backed out and turned the corner. She stepped inside and closed the door. Firm, final, quiet. She stood in the foyer for a moment, watching the snow begin again outside the glass pane. Then, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text. From an unknown number. You may want to check your mailbox. Signed, a friend. Downtown Nashville pulsed just beyond the courthouse steps. Traffic humming. Sirens somewhere distant. A street musician playing slide guitar outside a coffee shop. But inside Thomas Yates's law office, time moved slower. The oak-paneled walls muffled the outside world, and the air smelled of old books and lemon oil. Helen sat across from Thomas, her hands folded in her lap, a fresh manila folder on the desk between them. Her coat hung neatly on the back of her chair. She wore a brooch today, gold, shaped like a sparrow. Frank had given it to her on their 20th anniversary. "You sure about this?" Thomas asked, glancing over the latest revisions. "I was sure the day I left your office last time," Helen said. "Today, I'm just finishing the job." Thomas nodded, flipping through the pages. "This one will name the new beneficiary under the charitable clause, full transfer of any residual estate." He looked up. "Children's library, right?" "Turner Community Children's Library," Helen said. "The one on Jefferson, next to the old Methodist chapel." "Good choice. I used to take my grandson there before he discovered video games." He smiled, then passed the paperwork across the desk. Helen signed with a steady hand. Thomas moved the page aside. "As for Evan, he remains primary for anything personal, sentimental, keepsakes, the antique armoire, family photo albums, your wedding band if it isn't buried with you." "It won't be," Helen said quietly. "It'll be in the bottom drawer of the quilt chest. Evan can have it. Sabrina won't touch it." He nodded. "Smart." The door opened behind them, and Marlene stepped in, coat flaring, scarf trailing behind her like a ribbon in the wind. "I brought my good pen," she said, waving it. "The fancy one with the eagle nib." Thomas chuckled. "You're just in time." Marlene slid into the chair beside Helen, signed in the witness slot with a flourish, then leaned over to pat Helen's knee. "You're doing something better than revenge today," she said. "You're doing legacy right." "I didn't want it to come to this," Helen murmured. "I didn't want to give up on family." "You didn't give up," Marlene said. "You just redefined what family gets to inherit from you." The papers were gathered, clipped, and slid into Thomas's filing system with ceremonial precision. He stood, offering Helen his hand. "It's done," he said. "Sealed, witnessed, filed by end of day." Helen rose and shook it. "Thank you." She walked out of the office with Marlene at her side. The elevator chimed softly as they stepped inside. "I've never seen you look so light," Marlene said. Helen leaned back against the polished wall. "It's strange. You'd think it'd feel like closing a door?" "It is," Marlene said. "But sometimes, that's how you let light in." They stepped out onto the sidewalk just as Carla pulled up in her flour-dusted minivan. She jumped out, apron still on, bakery boxes in the back seat sliding sideways. "You did it?" she asked, eyes wide. Helen smiled. "All signed." Carla threw her arms around her, squeezing her like a lemon. "I am so proud of you, I could scream. Want a cookie?" "I always want a cookie," Helen said, laughing softly. Marlene pulled one from the front seat. "Snickerdoodle." "Still warm." They stood there on the curb, 3 women, a little older, a little stronger, a little wiser than the world gave them credit for. Helen looked across the street. A group of schoolchildren was walking by with library cards in hand, led by a teacher holding a clipboard. "You think they'll remember any of this someday?" she asked, mostly to herself. Carla followed her gaze. "They won't remember the fight. Just the shelves you helped fill?" Helen blinked, nodding once. A car honked behind them. Just traffic, not trouble. They started toward the parking garage, still chatting, still laughing. But when Helen reached for her door handle, she froze. A small white envelope sat tucked beneath her windshield wiper. No stamp, no return address, just her name, handwritten. She opened it slowly. Inside was a printed screenshot, a transfer of funds, a line item labeled Legal Retainer, Turner Estate Review, paid from Evan and Sabrina's joint account, and below it, scribbled in Sharpie, "You may want to ask your son what he didn't tell you." Helen's stomach dropped. Helen didn't call Evan. She let the envelope sit on the kitchen table for 2 days. By then, the corners had curled from the dry heat of the radiator. The ink hadn't smudged. Sharpie never did. On the third evening, just as the sun slipped behind the line of leafless maples, her landline rang. She didn't answer. It rang again. And again. On the fourth call, she picked it up. "Hi, Mom." His voice was frayed, too quiet. "I saw your name pop up," she said calmly. "Was wondering when you'd find yours on the caller ID, too." A silence, then a breath. "I messed up?" Helen leaned her hip against the counter, fingers brushing the cold edge of the envelope. "Did you hire a lawyer behind my back?" "I didn't file anything," he said quickly. "I swear. Sabrina wanted to explore our options. She thought maybe, if we knew where things stood legally, we could find a middle ground." Helen said nothing. "I didn't want to hurt you," he added. "I just didn't stop her. That's the part that did." Another long silence. Helen let it stretch, then. "She moved out." Helen blinked. Evan's voice cracked. "Last night. Packed everything while I was at work. Left a note and took the baby books, the ultrasound prints, even the crib we never set up." Helen swallowed hard. She hadn't expected that. "She said I didn't defend her legacy, that I chose you. But I didn't choose anyone, Mom. I just froze." Helen closed her eyes. Her hand rested now on the stove, the metal edge grounding her. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For letting it go this far. For letting her say those things. For making you feel like a burden when you've always been." "A foundation," Helen said, opening her eyes. "I know." He let out a shaky breath. "I don't know what happens now," he added. Helen glanced toward the back window. Snow had started again, soft and quiet, feathering over the flower beds beneath the porch. "Now," she said, "you start over." He didn't reply. "I'm not angry, Evan," she added. "But I'm not undoing anything either." "I know." Helen's voice softened. "You're still in the will. You'll still get what matters. But the house, the accounts, the rest? I gave it to something that won't betray it." More silence. Then Evan said quietly, "You gave it to kids who don't even know your name." "No," Helen said. "I gave it to kids who'll say it every time they pull a book off a shelf I helped build." She heard him nod on the other end. They said goodbye. Nothing dramatic, no promises. Just a soft click. 2 days later, the gossip bloomed like frost on glass. "Did you hear?" She kicked him out. "No," he left her. "No." Helen made the house off limits and she cracked. Helen kept her chin high at the post office, the grocery store, even church. She smiled politely and said nothing. The truth was already doing its work. That weekend, Marlene brought over a thermos of hot cocoa and 2 mugs shaped like snowmen. She set them down with a wink. No lemon bars, just marshmallows and vengeance. They toasted at the kitchen table, steam rising in curls, and Helen finally laughed like she hadn't since fall. "You really doing okay?" Marlene asked, leaning back in her chair. Helen nodded. "I am, just hollowed out in a clean way." "Like a winter squash?" "Exactly." Later that day, Carla arrived in her flour-dusted apron, holding a loaf of still warm sourdough. She didn't say anything at first, just handed it over and hugged Helen like she meant it. "Bread fixes what lawyers can't," she said finally. Helen smiled. "You sure you're not part preacher?" "Just practical." That evening, Helen pulled on her boots and coat, grabbed the daffodil bulbs she hadn't had the heart to plant in the fall, and stepped out into the snow-covered yard. The earth was cold, but not frozen. Not yet. She knelt down, pressed her fingers into the soil, and made room. One bulb at a time. Quiet. Intentional. A future no one would claim before it bloomed. By the time she finished, the snow had gathered in her hair. Her knees ached. Her breath came in white puffs. But the garden was planted, and the door behind her glowed with warm light. She stood, brushing dirt from her gloves. Then her phone vibrated. She pulled it from her coat pocket. Unknown number. Message. The account Sabrina used wasn't the only one. He moved more than you think. A photo followed. A document. Withdrawal authorization form. Evan Turner. Full signature. Dated 2 weeks ago. It started the way those things always do in small towns, with a hushed whisper over lunch at the church fellowship hall. Sabrina Turner filed Chapter 7. No. Yes. Public record. She maxed out 4 credit cards. Something about a designer nursery and a failed momfluencer podcast. Bet she thought she'd have Helen's house to fall back on? Didn't we all? Helen heard it from 3 different women on 3 different days. She nodded politely, said nothing. She didn't need to fan the fire. Sabrina had already lit the match. By Friday, even Carla brought it up while delivering a box of apple fritters. She's toast, Carla muttered, setting the box down on Helen's kitchen table. A full Chapter 7er. Burned through everything, trying to claim emotional distress on the paperwork like that's gonna erase a Prada bill. Helen pulled 2 mugs from the cabinet. She's still driving that SUV? Not anymore, Carla said, taking a sip of coffee. Repoed Wednesday morning, right in front of Green Hills Starbucks. She walked inside, came out, and the car was gone. Evan had to pick her up. Helen raised an eyebrow. He's still talking to her? Carla shrugged. Word is, only about child support, but she's moved into her cousin's spare room in East Nashville, half the zip code away from the life she thought she was owed. Helen didn't say a word, just stirred honey into her tea and hummed a quiet tune, some old jazz standard, slow and steady, the sound of a clean house and a clear conscience. Evan showed up at her door the next day, alone. No SUV, no bags. Just a worn coat and eyes that had aged 10 years in 3 months. He didn't ask to come in, just stood on the porch, shifting from foot to foot. I've been working at the co-op, he said. Helping with the snowplow routes, getting by? Helen nodded. Good work. He looked down at his boots. I just wanted you to know I'm not proud of what I signed. I wasn't thinking. I wanted to feel in control of something. You were in control, Helen said. You just didn't know how to use it. He nodded. Slow and heavy. I'll be all right, he said. Eventually. I know, Helen said. He turned to go. Evan. He stopped. If you're ever ready to build something instead of inherit it, there's still a key under the back flower pot. He swallowed hard, gave a short nod, and walked down the steps. The wind caught the edge of his coat and snapped it like a warning. Helen shut the door and leaned against it for a moment. Not sad, not angry, just still. Marlene came by later that afternoon, a basket of freshly sewn quilt squares in hand. She plopped them on the dining room table and pulled off her gloves. You heard, she said. Helen poured 2 cups of tea. Bankruptcy or the SUV? Marlene grinned. Both. Lord, it's like the Karma Express finally stopped in our neighborhood. Helen smiled faintly and passed her the mug. Let's not gloat. Oh, I'm not gloating, I'm documenting, Marlene said. Quilt's gonna have a whole corner named after that mess. Gonna call it Legacy Pieced Properly. Helen actually laughed. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting golden stripes across the hardwood floor. The house was quiet, but full, not with chaos or need or performance, just comfort. That evening, Helen sorted her mail and found a thick envelope from the Turner Community Children's Library. Inside, a letter, printed in neat serif font on glossy paper. Dear Mrs. Turner, we are honored to inform you that your contribution has allowed us to complete the full renovation of our children's wing. In recognition, we've renamed it the Helen M. Turner Literacy Garden. Your name will greet every child who walks through those doors. May your story inspire generations. With gratitude, the Board of Trustees. Helen reread the letter twice. Then she sat back and exhaled slowly. She didn't cry, but something inside her settled, deep and lasting. She stood, carried the letter to the fireplace mantel, and tucked it next to a photo of Frank holding baby Evan, back when the world had been both simpler and more complicated. Her phone buzzed. One new voicemail, from Evan. Hey, Mom. I visited the library today. Didn't know you'd done all that. The kids were coloring in a little reading nook with your name on the wall. Thought you should know. It mattered. Helen closed her eyes and listened to the quiet hum of the furnace. Then she picked up her pen, pulled out a new folder, and began writing instructions for the daffodil beds. By April, the daffodils bloomed. Yellow and stubborn and bright against the dark mulch, they flared up in little clusters across Helen's yard like tiny bursts of joy. Some had opened early, others still curled tight in green sheaths, waiting for just the right morning to show themselves. Helen knelt beside them, tugging weeds from the beds she'd once been too tired to care about. Her gloves were speckled with dirt, her knees sore, but her chest felt clear. The kind of clear that comes after a long, hard freeze has finally cracked and melted. From the porch, Marlene sipped sweet tea and called out, "That one by the mailbox? Looks like it's about to riot." Helen glanced up, shading her eyes. "Good. I like the loud ones." Carla leaned back in the rocking chair beside her, lifting her glass. "You are the loud ones now." They all laughed. The porch was draped in morning light, the air tinged with honeysuckle and the faint burn of someone down the street still learning how to barbecue. Helen had put a fresh coat of paint on the porch swing 2 weeks ago, a soft robin's egg blue. It creaked gently now as she sat beside them, brushing dirt from her gloves and tucking them under one thigh. Carla passed her a butter biscuit wrapped in a linen napkin. "Fresh from the oven. You'd better eat it before Marlene does." "I'm rationing my carbs for gossip," Marlene said, licking sugar from her thumb. Helen took the biscuit and bit into it. Warm, flaky, just enough salt. She hummed in approval. From inside the house, the mail slot clinked. Carla stood. "I'll grab it." She returned with a small bundle, utility bills, a local gardening flyer, and a stiff cream-colored envelope addressed in perfect cursive. "Looks like Thomas," she said, handing it over. Helen opened it and smiled. A holiday card, Easter-themed. 2 lambs in a watercolor meadow. Inside, a brief handwritten note. "Helen, hope spring finds you strong. The library sent a statement last week. You'd be proud. Also, your name's been brought up as a speaker at the Women's Legacy Brunch in June. If you're interested, I can connect the dots." Best, Thomas Yates. Helen passed the card to Marlene, who scanned it, then smirked. "You're officially a civic icon." "I'm officially someone who knows how to draw a line," Helen said. "Same thing," Carla added. Just then, a familiar sound echoed up the sidewalk, footsteps in boots that used to carry a different kind of weight. Evan appeared at the gate, carrying a bag of mulch slung over one shoulder and a carton of snapdragon seedlings in his other hand. "You planting without me?" he asked. Helen stood, brushing her palms on her jeans. "You're late." "I'm learning to show up," he said. He set the carton down gently beside the flower beds and looked around, squinting into the sun. You've done a lot with the place. No more than I had to, she said. They didn't hug. They didn't need to. He pulled on gloves and knelt beside her in the dirt, wordless as he started working. The silence was the good kind now. Mature, lived in, solid. Carla leaned toward Marlene. We should give them space. Nah, Marlene said, stretching her legs out. They've got the whole garden. This porch is ours. Helen overheard them and smiled as she planted another bulb, her fingers moving like muscle memory. Beside her, Evan pressed mulch down gently, careful not to disturb the base of the new growth. Library sent me a copy of their newsletter, he said. The reading garden looks beautiful. You took the baby? She asked. He nodded. She pointed at your name on the sign. She can't read yet, but she liked the butterflies on the mural. They kept working. Later, after he'd left and the porch fell quiet again, Helen went back inside and retrieved her estate folder. She didn't need to open it. She just held it for a moment, felt its weight, its meaning, what it had cost, what it had returned. She slid it back into the drawer with care, stood and looked around her warm, humming kitchen. Outside, daffodils nodded in the breeze. A life unclaimed, a life unbothered, a life chosen. She poured herself a glass of iced tea, walked out to the porch, and sank into the swing. And as the wind stirred and her garden glowed gold in the afternoon light, she said, just once, to no one but herself. I barely left her anything, and it gave me everything.